Done.
All right. Hello, everyone, to another show. And today I have very excited to talk with Eshan Sharma, who I followed Carvan for a while now. He's a historian in training and has done a lot of work in popularizing history and recommend everyone to check out the Carvan YouTube channel. So let's start with that. How did your interest in history start?
Thank you so much, Anvesh, for hosting me. It's always nice to have conversations with people who are equally passionate about history, sociology, society, and so on and so forth, even political science and politics for that matter, and activism, of course. So, thank you so much for hosting me. The interest of history, I think, I owe it to my grandfather, and I've said it in various conversations with people that he was the person who knew a lot of Urdu. He was a poet. My dada, late Babulal Sharma, and he was a person with whom I grew up because both my parents were working. So we had to spend a lot of time with our grandparents in Kanpur, where we grew up. He used to ask me to play old Hindi songs on YouTube because YouTube was very new at that time, and that generation was not aware of how to use or how to navigate through internet. It was very new at that time, 2008, 2009. So he got me into old Hindi films and old Hindi songs. I think that began from that. My interest in history kind of began developing, followed by every year I used to get on my birthdays. The one gift that I always got myself was a GK book, a general knowledge book. And in UP, there was a publisher called Upkar Publication. So they used to carry out this yearbook every year. So reading those kind of books and interacting with my grandfather, talking about how Noor Jahan left for partition
Mm.
after Jugnu in 1947, or how Dilip Kumar came from Peshawar and made it large in Bombay. Such kind of things really fascinated me to history, but I never considered it to be a profession or a professional degree of sorts that I would pursue. I wanted to get into political science and maybe wanted to become a politician in in future. But things turned out pretty good, I think, now that I got myself into history and doing it professionally now.
It's interesting because so your interest in cinema also probably developed because of your grandfather.
Yes.
Uh, he was interested. He would introduce you to these figures, which I am assuming people of your generations, our generation, are probably not much aware of. Like I don't know a
No.
lot of people of my generation listening to Noor Jahan, for instance.
So actually, what happened was there's an interesting story in my family.
Hmm.
My grandfather was working in IIT Kanpur, and he was offered a piece of land. So in IIT, you don't have your own land. You live in a government quarter, and once you retire, you have to move out of the campus. So he was offered a piece of land near IIT, outside the campus, to post retirement plans. But at that time, there was a Murphy radio that he wanted to buy to listen to Chitrahar and other radio shows at that time, and he chose radio over the piece of land. So that's a very famous story in our family that shows his love for music,
Hmm.
his love for cinema. And at that time in IIT, a lot of actors and singers would visit. So he took all our uncles, aunts, and my father to these concerts of Tun Tun, Manna Day, and other, Ravi Shankar. So all that kind of thing were there in our family. That cultural appreciation, appreciation for different kind of media was always there. And he introduced me. The first song that I remember listening was a song called "Aao Hamare Hotel Mein Chao Chai Piyo Ji Garam Garam Biscuit Khalo Naram Naram." इसमें निम्मी है आई थिंक, and then there's J Om Prakash.
mm,
So these actors singing, dancing. Then I listened to a lot of KL Sehgal. He loved KL Sehgal. जब दिल ही टूट गया, हम जी के क्या करेंगे, या गम दिए मुस्तकिल, कितना नाजुक है दिल ये न जाना. These kind of songs, these were 1930s. And when I used to talk about this with my friends, they were clueless. Who is this Kundan Lal Sehgal? Who was Noor Jahan? Who was Dilip Kumar? So it got me thinking about how I never listened to these young, my generation music, sadly. I missed out on a lot of Honey Singh, a lot of
you're not missing
Basha.
much. Yeah.
But I got into that kind of, and now even today, whenever I
Mm,
miss my grandparents, I usually put up a song of KL Sehgal on. I have a gramophone at home, a record player, where I have a record of KL Sehgal
mm.
that I always put and enjoy the evening. So that kind of thing happened.
Yeah, so I uh I am unfortunately sometimes inundated with noise masquerading as music, which is most of modern music with few exceptions. And you sing parts. I'm blissfully unaware of their work, and thank God for that. But we'll talk about music because I think we share a passion for classical music and ghazals. But I want to talk a little bit about history first before we go to cinema and music. So, because you're in the realm of public history, I'm wondering what you think about the relationship of politics and history and the larger debate around politicization of history today.
Uh, History is always political.
Hmm,
Everything I think in the world is political. Nothing is apolitical, and being apolitical itself is a political stance. And from the whole feminist movement of the 1980s, 90s, what came out of that churning was that the personal is political, and this must be understood in terms of when we talk about history. History is not the entirety of past. History is the selection of events that happened in the past chosen by a trained professional, and the trained professional is also part of a society. So they are also coming with a political stance. But the training of history involves you to diminish that kind of personal bias or political bias that you might have personally, individually as a person, but not as a historian. So when you think of this history being political, I would think of it as the use of history by politics, popular politics, that is the electoral politics. And it's not a modern phenomena. It happened in the time of Ashok. It happened in time of Akbar. It is happening in time of the present regime, and it has happened in the previous regime or the previous one. History is a form of legitimization. The kings used it to legitimize their own lineage, Chandravanshi, Suryavanshi, these kind of titles that they gave themselves, taking lineage from the gods directly, using mythology to prove their lineage was one kind of legitimization. Then the coming of these court writers, Abul Fazl writing
hmm,
Akbarnama, and then others writing court histories of emperors, not just Mughal emperors, but other Rajput emperors or Chandrabardai का जो
hmm.
पृथ्वीराज रासो है वो देखिए आप, all kind of things, and then Padmavat, another kind of story coming up. That's another politicizing of history. In modern India, figures like Hitler used history to show the uh, what do you say, the superiority of the Aryans, this
Modern
white,
war. Yeah.
yeah, the supremacy of the Aryans, and
Hmm.
that whole concept of Aryan being transcribed here in our society as well, in other European societies as well. to
mm.
segregate between the Aryans and the Dravidians in Indian context, of course. So that's how history is politicized by electoral politicians and kings and rulers. So that's, I think, that must be understood by people all along, because what they get to read about history might be just one narrative. History is not unilateral, it's not unidimensional. Um, there's no one way of looking at history. You can look at history from various ways, and they all might be equally correct, or they all might be equally wrong. So that's the beauty of history. But what politicizing history does is it limits it to one dimension that suits the particular reign, the political reign of that time. And they might change it once once the reign changes, the political reign changes, that narrative might be replaced by another narrative. And that
But you
has happened in
also,
India. Yeah.
in modern history writing, I think the important question to ask is to distinguish between legitimate viewpoints versus politicization of history. I think that is the main issue of contention here, which is that the legitimate viewpoints on both the sides, on the left, on the nationalist, the right, or the Marxists, legitimate debates and legitimate ways of writing and contestations. But that is different from, say, forming a mythological narrative or a narrative entirely to suit political ideology or political interest. And I think that distinction is important. How would you distinguish that?
Uh, so history writing as a form developed with the coming of the British in India.
Mm,
James Mill was the person who wrote the British history of India, where he defined Indian history into three parts: Hindu India, Muslim India, and the British India. I think from there, the whole idea of this legitimate history versus the other kind of history emerged in some senses, because then you have a nationalist perspective emerging with H.C. Ray Chaudhary or Jadunath Sarkar or R.C. Majumdar, who were essentially, they were by profession, they were historians. They had
mm,
degrees in history and
yeah.
philosophy and theology, and they were working on ancient Indian texts and relooking at them from an Indic point of view, where they say that ancient India was full of glories, and the barbarians came from the outside, invaded India as a whole, and then the British came, and now we have to reclaim our ancient civilization, something like that. So ancient glory was at the center of the discussion, followed by in 60s and 70s comes the Marxist scholars, where you have another kind of ideology coming up from the material dialecticism of Marx, and it's not the political Marxism, it's the historical vision of Marx, which is very different from what I think of the political Marxism. Then they think about the if we have to narrow it down for in easier terms, any change in society happens because of the shift in the means of production.
Mm.
That's in easier words if we have to define the Marxist point of view. So they worked on a lot of economic history,
Irfan
shift
Habib.
from culture. Irfan Habib, and then Professor Romila Thapar worked on the polity, ancient Indian polity under Ashok. Then there was other kind of, D.D. Kosambi worked on another kind of
Mm,
history, which was also political history, but also empirical, economic history, scientific history. Then you have R.S. Sharma and D.N. Jha working on different kind of histories. Buddhism also, the study of Buddhism comes in, study of Jainism comes in, study of women comes in with Uma Chakravarti, her book called Gendered Caste, and other kind of works that were coming up. Followed by another school called the subaltern school. And subaltern, we see another kind of, I asked this question to Professor Gyan Pandey, who is one of the leading figures of
mm,
the subaltern school. he suggested that the subalterns are people, who had no agency in society. So that study of people who had no agency in society, writing their history, came forth. That became another kind of legitimate past. So to sum it up, I think how I see is history is it's a specialized field. Okay, so as I'm saying that history is a specialized field. It's a specialized discipline. You have, like any other science, you have to have a training. Not everybody can be a doctor. Not everybody can be an engineer. So likewise, not everybody can be a historian. But the problem with history is that history is very personal to all of us. We all have a past. We all love our past. Some of us hate our past, so we have our own biases about the past, and that's our past. So when we are part of a nation, we also try to associate ourselves with the nation's past, and associate our pride, our ego with that kind of past, and we all have an opinion on that. Having an opinion is not having a scholarly outlook towards past. You can always have an opinion about anything, but as a scholar, when we study the past, we have to disassociate ourselves from those kind of emotional attachments that people might have with history and past. So that makes it more legitimate. That's my take on the question of legitimacy. We have to see if the academic point of view, which which honors multiplicity of narratives, is taken into consideration while making a point on history. So that's, I think, that would be a legitimate source over any other. Nowadays on WhatsApp, thanks to this online conversation platform called WhatsApp, a lot of illegitimate history passes on, or illegitimate kind of mythification of history passes on, and that is considered to be history by a lot of people. So there's a need that we establish the fact that there is something called an academic point of view, which is a legitimate history. And as Professor Thapar, in a recent video that you might have seen on our Instagram, she says there is nothing like truth in history. You can't say, as a scholar of history, we can never say that this is what happened. We always say, as scholars, that we think that this might have happened. We give a possibility of occurrences because we really cannot go back in time and reconstruct the past. So whoever says that this is what happened, I'm telling you this has happened, this is true past, is what might come under illegitimate kind of history. And who says that I think this might have happened, but if new evidences, new sources come forth, new interpretations come forth, they might change the understanding of what I have said, and I might reconsider my position. So that's kind of a legitimate history for me. Yeah.
So I think it's important to understand where this grievance is coming from, and this grievance is coming from the idea or the argument that there has been an institutional capture of history by certain ideology or a certain ideological cohort. So, for instance, in my conversation with Triputaman Singh, he talked about how the Nehruvians, after Nehru, even Indira Gandhi's ICHR, completely dismantled anything that left of the right wing intellectual movement by preventing them from having an access to certain institutions like ICHR or the Nehru Memorial Library. Under Mridula Mukherjee, I think recently in 2010s, a group of intellectuals, including Ram Guha and very prominent intellectuals of all stripes noted that that Nehru Memorial Museum was essentially being made into a propaganda outlet, and it has stopped functioning as a research outlet. So considering all of these grievances, these arguments that have been put forth by credible intellectuals, what would you say about that? What would you say about the fact that the reason the WhatsApp history exists or the mythification of history exists is because they have been denied access to the legitimate institution for writing such a history, their own history.
Uh, I don't know about the institutional takeover of the ICHR or other organizations because I have not studied that and I am not in a position to comment on that. But the question of how these kind of mythification history comes is, I think the fact that a lot of us in society do not prefer taking social sciences as a full time course, and we might go for the sciences and commerce stream. So there's a primacy of science in our society. People want to become engineers and nobody wants to become a historian. So once they become a engineer, they have this fantasy about knowing the past. And they read a couple of books and they think that they have understood the past. And then there is this whole idea that all history is written by the leftist. And this is the kind of narrative that we often hear. Ki we should disown the leftist history and we should write our own new history now. And a lot of books are being written today from a different point of view. The same question should ask is how legitimate they are. If they are written by scholars who have a degree in history, who understand the craft of a historian, who question their sources correctly or in the way or in the manner that a historian does, because a lot of historians' work is asking questions to the sources, interpreting them
Hmm.
from their own perspective. So I think that is something that we need to understand.
Can
The
you
reason
give me
why
an example of the kind of books you're talking about?
the kind of books that are being written today,
Yeah.
or the kind of books that were
Yeah.
I have not read much of what the the so-called, because I don't see a left or right in history
Mhm.
writing. I always see a nationalist school or a
Mm.
Marxist from a pure empirical schools of history kind of a
Yeah.
thing. I don't see this binary of left and right because that's what happens in politics, not in history.
Yes.
History means there's academic history and public history. That's another kind of differentiation. So I see a lot of public history coming up now, written by engineers, economists, politicians, etc., 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 which is gaining and advocates, of course, which is gaining a lot of currency because they provide an alternative, which a lot of people think that the left is quote unquote have not provided. But I would doubt those kind of histories because the kind of I have not read. I would always agree that I have not read much of public history and this popular history that is being carried out now. But the question as
But
readers
do you
people should
not
ask
think that
is
pursuit is also important, that it's important to critique this popular history precisely because they have the ability to, uh, because they're written in accessible format, much more accessible than,
yes,
say, history of other, what a proper historian would write in an academic book published by Routledge or something like that.
of
So,
course.
because of their accessible format, more people are getting access to that. And so, it is a job of the historian to provide a proper critique of those books to sort of take people away from that and show people why it's wrong.
Yes, of course, that's the job of a historian today, that to counter the popular narratives. They might be unpopular. Historians might be unpopular today, because they don't gel well with the popular understanding of the past. But it is the duty for historians especially to propagate what they think is academic point of view. People might not agree with them today. And also, as Tripur also pointed out, as you mentioned, I would not say the takeover, but academics for a very long time, I think, created this gap between the public and the
mm,
professional, sitting in the ivory towers of academic universities. And those universities, which, there are two, three universities in India which are known for their departments, be the Delhi University, JNU, and in the south, maybe the Hyderabad University. But these universities are not accessible for a majority of students. You a lot of people can't come from Gujarat to Delhi, as I have found out. They can't go to that other state to study. So the need of the hour, of course, is for them to make their academics, their
mm,
academia, their scholarship accessible, uh, and write in language that the general populace might understand, not use fancy terminologies, which is a scholarly terminology, of course, but might not be accessible for a lot of people. And that is why I think people like Ruby Lal are doing fantastic work with their books on Noor Jahan or Gulbatan Banu Begum, which are popular history format, but writing scholarly works. Even Audrey Trushke's book on Sanskrit narratives of Muslim past. That's another fascinating work that I recently read. Or even Ram Guha, who has, I think, who does not call him a historian. He would like to call himself an environmentalist or something. But
mm,
his work on Gandhi, I think, is very accessible for people who are interested. And they are being translated into different languages. That is another important thing that we have to make literature accessible to different languages. For a long time, a lot of history books were not translated into Hindi and or other languages. So if it is not available in Hindi, we can't think of having it translated in Odia, because Hindi as a regional language or as a language of communication is has more speakers. If the book is not being translated in Hindi, we can't think of it being translated into Bangla or Odia or Tulu or any other language. Now I'm seeing a difference. That these books are being translated by smaller publication houses. So in Marathi, there might be some publication house who would translate Professor Thapar's books. In Bangla, there might be some local publication who has taken this task of translating. So it is the need. You have correctly pointed out there's a need for scholars to reach out to the public now, because the other kind of history, which is written by non-professionals, who might be career diplomats, career uh, advocates, and career economists, they are propagating a history which is not academic, in the sense they are promoting one kind of history, one lens of history,
mm,
and that lens might divide the societies. History is a medicine that you can apply to a bruised society if applied properly. So I think that, yeah, you have correctly pointed out, we have to make history accessible to the public and not think lowly of them.
mm,
We should
mm,
not deny the fact that uh, the public holds a position in society. We must not understand them as fools and ignorance. If we think of them as fools and ignorance, we might not even try to have a dialogue with them. We have to first put have them seated on the same table and then have a chat with them as equals. That what you think of history is wrong, because
mm,
it's perfectly okay if you believe in this, but have a different opinion also. Think about it. Whatever I'm telling you, you might not agree with me right now, but ponder about it once you get time. So yeah, we have to create a dialogue. That's what I think, and that's what we have been trying to do for the last 3 years, 4 years now, to create a dialogue with students, with people from the public.
Well, I think in academia, being in academia, there exists a divide, let's say a condescension towards people who write popular history. And that includes, by the way, people like Guha. I've heard academics, whom I will not name, well known academics, demean Guha for bypassing the normal roots of history, the peer review and things like that, and just writing books for popular audience. And that apparently is a bad thing because you should stay in your own academic affiliation and write for your own audience. I think that is nonsense. I think if your work is good enough, if the methods that you employ are legitimate, it should not matter how accessible your writing is or through what means you're putting it out. And for us to have a real conversation on popular history and to critique popular history that are, let's say, uh, divide society, or that is, let's say, wrong, popular histories that are wrong, that don't that are nowhere near the closest approximation to the truth. We need to not be condescending towards the act of writing popular history or an accessible history, not just history, anything, popular political science, popular sociology.
Correct, correct, of course. And I'm seeing a change in academia in the point of view that they are accepting now of popular writings if the method of history is applied to them. And that's a very good change that is happening in academia world over, not just in Indian academic view, but also the Indian history kind of world all across in different universities in the world. So that's a very good change, and I think this should be promoted, this should be appreciated. And that's why we have a book prize that we started 2 years ago, the Carvan Book Award, where we also award a popular writing on history which has kind of impacted the or has contributed to a better public understanding of the past. So that I think is a welcome change.
What do you think about the state of academia now? Because I see, given the recent what happened at Indraprasth College, where the entire sociology department was essentially laid off and replaced with people who were more ideologically affiliated with the state narrative as opposed to being the ones who were more qualified. Pure technicality, but it is signaling something, which is the capture of intellectual discourse by people who are ideologically aligned with the government. It does not, the pursuit of truth does not matter as much as ideological indoctrination.
Uh, I am not a part of academia right now. I'm being trained as a historian right now. I am not a historian who's part of the academic circles. I am still doing my degree in history. So I don't know about the technicalities, but on the face value, whatever we see as students is a systematic takeover of academia by one set of school. They would say that earlier the Marxists did that. It's their defense, they would say earlier these people took over academia and they didn't let us publish, etc., etc. That's what a lot of the right wing claim. I don't know about that because I was not born. I was born in 2000. Whatever I'm seeing today, I would say that, and I would protest against whatever we see. And it's not just the laying off, because the funding in universities is now limited. Funding to humanities is now diminishing. more emphasis is being given to sciences and the kind of institutions that are being renamed. If you see, the National Museum Institute is renamed as the Indian Institute of Heritage on the lines of Indian Institute of Technology. So we are kind of taking it to the other side and see uh, sciences ki tarah we are trying to promote them. Then I think the other side is also the censorship. Achit Vinayak, the scholar in Ashoka, when he was going to give that lecture on Palestine and Israel conflict,
I
he was
gave
not
it a
allowed.
Jindal. It was in my university.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he was not allowed to speak in the university.
No, he
So it's
was
such kind
he was allowed to speak, but the dean, uh, the registrar then sent a complaint, wrote a letter
complaint.
to him saying that, these are not the things that you should have said as, we invited you in good faith and you are
Yeah,
indoctrinating our students and giving them false facts and making it a political
yeah.
battle.
And then in Ashoka, a scholar wrote a paper, and then I think he had to resign and he had to leave the university. Such kind of news when they come, it is upsetting to see the state of academia, where scholars are not allowed to express their scholarly opinions on any sort of thing. Not just history, I think it is a larger problem with humanity as a whole, where they also censor political science scholarship, sociology scholarship, where a study of inequality, might be censored just to prevent the data from coming out. So this is not what a democracy does. So I think we have to think about this as students of history. It is definitely worrying. What would happen? The number of seats in universities are shrinking. For a PhD, they had already removed MPhil from the academic structure. MPhil was the middle ground for a lot of people who cannot afford to get into PhD. PhD is a demanding degree which asks you 5 years to 7 years of
Hmm.
dedication where you can't work. So people coming from different economic backgrounds might find it difficult to pursue a full-time PhD. For them, a 2 year MPhil meant that they could apply to a job of a assistant professor and work. That opportunity has been taken away from a lot of people. So that's kind of disheartening to see. But I hope as a history student, we are always optimists. We are always optimistic about the future that things might change. But we don't see it happening right now. It would take some time, but I think good days would come someday.
Well, I'm not an optimist, so uh, we don't have much time to talk about cinema, to talk about everything that I wanted to talk about cinema, which is go through the entire history of cinema from the beginning. So I would instead restrict our conversation on cinema to, let's say, the 80s to now, because I've always held that the 80s were the worst decade for Indian cinema, uh, Indian mainstream cinema. And because you have done work on parallel cinema, and I think one of the reasons uh, directors like Govind Helani, Sam Benekal, Kumar Sahani, and Adur Gopalakrishnan, all of this emerged in the 80s. And the 80s is precisely when Bollywood, which is mainstream Indian cinema, was producing complete trash. There's no other way of saying it. Like, if you watch some of the movies in the 80s, that even the great actors, the Amitabh Bachchan and Dilip Kumar in his late years, the trash movies. It's they're unoriginal. The ideas are copied. That is when we had our own Indian Superman and the movies which are a parody of movies, let's say. So, do you think that the sad state of mainstream cinema actually gave way to created a space for these directors, the one who led the Indian New Wave parallel cinema to emerge?
Uh, yeah, 80s was a different time actually. It's not trash, but a different kind of cinema emerged, and that had their own audience kind of deal. They had their own kind of audience, and of course, Mithun Chakravarti became Mithun Chakravarti in the 80s.
Yeah, Disco
Rekha
Dancer
became
was.
what Rekha became in 80s, and Amol Palekar came up, and the whole parallel cinema, of course. Uh, in 1968, Arun Kaul and Mrinal Sen co-wrote a paper called A Manifesto for New Cinema Movement in India. It was for a publication called Close Up. It was a magazine where they complained about the rising price of stars, this whole star culture in Indian cinema, and the kind of plots and melodrama which was the dominant narrative of cinema at that time. And they called for a new movement or a new change in the kind of cinema that was being made, and also talked about the assimilation of international film culture into Indian film culture, also the coming up of the film festivals that they wanted to, like in Cannes, there is a Cannes Film Festival, where in France there is
Mhm.
a Venice Film Festival. So they wanted that assimilation of international film culture into Indian film sensibility. So that article really paved the way in many senses for this new movement. It did not emerge in 1980s. It started in
Yeah,
1969, and it developed slowly and gradually. In 1980s, another kind of cinema emerged with Rishi Da and Basuda making a middle of the road cinema, which was a combination of both, where you have songs and music, you have some melodrama, a little bit of melodrama, but you also have a good plot, a good story, a middle of the road, which has the best of both worlds coming together. Because Indian cinema is known for their music and songs. The kind of dance sequences that we have is not there in any other kind of cinematic universes in the world. Now, others are also taking inspiration from our culture and taking introducing music to their films. So I think yes, partly because of the kind of repetitive plots in the films, which happened in 60s and 70s, led to the rise and growth of the new wave, as we call it, or the parallel cinema as people know it, or the art cinema to prosper, to grow.
the part about in the 50s, if you watch the movies of the 50s and 60s, 40s and 50s, directors like Guru Dutt and Raj Kapoor and Satyajit Ray, uh, Mrinal Sen was probably around that time, 60s. So
Yes,
the sort of movies that they were making, uh, they were educated on international cinema. They were educated on world cinema. That's why you had uh, extremely brilliant takes. One of the greatest movies ever made, Pyasa, was in the 50s. Somewhere along the way, I think what happened is that inspiration turned into imitation. So this is my hypothesis. So it's because we started completely imitating instead of imbibing or projecting what we have in our own tradition or own culture, which Satyajit Ray tried to do in Jal Sagar. Instead, we were making music, for instance, which were completely, which were almost all imitations of what were happening at that time in the Western populace. So that I think sort of limited the originality, the space to explore originality in Indian commercial cinema. What would you say to that?
uh, firstly, 50s 50s, the filmmakers like Guru Dutt and others were not educated about cinema at all. Um, they saw a couple of films here and
Hmm.
there, like they must have seen Bicycle Thieves by Vittorio De Sica, which was a
Hmm.
Italian neorealist. But in the 1940s, Satyajit Ray and Mrinal Sen set up the Calcutta Film Society. In Bombay, there was a Bombay Film Society. So this whole film society movement became, because there was no film institution at that time in India or in Asia as a whole. FTII only developed as a film institute in 1960s, and 62 I think was the first batch, if I'm not wrong. 62, 64 was the first batch of FTII, or FII as it was known, because television was not there at that time.
Hmm.
So I think they, thanks to the film movement, film society movement that happened, that became a window for people like Ray, Ghatak, Mrinal Sen, Guru Dutt, Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, and Bimal
Hmm.
Roy to watch international cinema, which in turn, of course, inspired some of them into
Yeah.
making films like Kasa or Kagas Ke Phool or etc. etc. Pather Panchali, of course, by Ray in 50s. Then about the inspiration becoming the imitation, I am not very sure, because I think they always maintain that their own sensibility in all these filmmakers maintain their own sensibility in parallel cinema at least.
Yeah.
In commercial cinema, there's another kind of historical process that was involved. 1970s and 80s was a turbulent economic phase for India. India lost its first female prime minister in 84, 84, 83, 84, when you had the Sikh riots and the Operation Blue Star failed and Indira Gandhi was killed. Before that, she did the nationalization of banks and other kind of economic policies that were introduced by Mrs. Gandhi, which led to a whole public uprising against the government, and they wanted to find an escape from the realities, and that's why you have this whole character building of an angry young man in 70s who was fighting the system, who was fighting the rich, working for the poor. He came from a slum. He might be a Muslim, he might be a Hindu, and in Saeed Akhtar Mirza's understanding, uh, Nasiruddin Shah, who was a Catholic in Albert Pinto, he became the angry young man. In Salim Langre Pe Matro, a Muslim, a Pasmanda Musalman becomes the figure of the angry young man. This shows the kind of impact society has on cinema. When there is a chaos in society, you have such violent, strong roles coming up, melodrama coming up, escapist medium coming up, cinema as an escapist medium. So I think all this thing that you say of copying the Hollywood style, Hollywood is always about action. A lot
Hmm.
of war films were made in America. In 70s and 80s, we also see a lot of war films being made in India. And even in 90s, LOC Kargil and all those kind of films that came in shows some kind of historical understanding and how society plays a role on cinema. So I think that's very interesting to see the connection between the two. We can't say anything with certainty, of course, because we really don't know a lot of other films. So we can't generalize it for the entirety of mainstream media, because uh, if there was a film like for example, say Khoon Bhari Maang,
Hmm.
there was Pakiza also, which was very good, and Pakiza by Kamal Amrohi was a mainstream film in the 70s. So we have both kind of cinema coming up, of course. Prakash Mehra's Zanjeer is a brilliant film, cinematically brilliant film. But Ajuba in 80s was a horrible film. Both
Yeah.
in both the films, Amitabh Bachchan played the role.
Also, Ramesh Sippy's attempt at the reboot sequel to Soleil, which was as bad as everyone expected it to be. Um, Forget
Yeah.
the name. So,
Then I think Ramu made Ramgarh Ke Sholay or something.
ah,
Uh, it was a horrible film. Uh, and yeah, of course, Sholay was again a very bad film. But I would think of it as a good film. I liked it. As a viewer, when I watched it in cinema hall in 2015, 16, when there was a 3D
hmm.
Sholay which was re-released in theaters, I watched that film. I really liked it, and that was the first time I was watching the film. I didn't watch it early, so yeah,
I'd
it
say
was
it
a
was
good.
fun, but certainly overrated.
It was overrated, of course. Sholay is grossly overrated.
It's not
It is
that
not the best
original.
film of the.
Yeah.
It, yeah, it is. It is a Western, Hollywood Western
Hmm.
film.
Even the
The song,
music is kind of.
the music is inspired from a Western. I'm forgetting the name of the chase sequences are what you see in the films of America. So it's not an of course it is not an original film in the sense of different elements coming together of different parts, but the kind of cinema that it pushed later on, I think that's again. I think if Sholay had not happened, Bandit Queen by Shekhar Kapoor would have not happened.
Hmm.
I would see it like that. It became a precursor to a lot of cinema that was made. Son Chiraiya would have not happened. Son Chiraiya, Manoj Bajpayee's, if you have seen the recent, it's a brilliant film about Chambal.
Hmm.
Ramgarh was not Chambal, but again, now a lot of films are being made on Chambal. Pan Singh Tomar, a
Hmm.
brilliant film. So
Excellent film.
yeah, it
So,
played a big role.
what do you think about, because we run out of time, uh, the future of Indian cinema? Because I've been conflicted for the past few years, since 2019, 2010s. Has been a confusing time for Indian cinema, because before that you could identify patterns, and you could say that, this is what it's trying to say, this is what the generation believes in. Since 2010s, it hasn't been that consistent, and we've produced a lot of very mediocre movies. They're not terrible,
Yes.
but certainly a lot of
They're
mediocre
mediocre.
movies, and a lot of movies which are pretty good. Sardar Udham, I think, was in few years ago, 2021. That was pretty good. But mainstream Bollywood cinema has certainly declined. It's not performing well at the box office. The movies that are performing well are complete shit, like the ones that currently SRK has starred in. Absolute shit. Jawan, and I couldn't sit through that movie. It was an insult to my intelligence. And Pathan, where do you see? I mean, if this pattern continues, and we're doomed.
Uh, uh, it's a heavy question. It's a loaded question because we have to talk about the future of cinema. India is going through a transformation. We are in a what uh, uh, what a lot of writers would say metamorphosis. We are going through a complete shift of our outlook. It's an evolutionary phase. So India opened its door to global economy in 1990s, mid 90s with
Hmm.
Narasimha Rao's and Manmohan Singh's liberalization policies. The effect of that policy started showing up in 2010s when India again underwent a change, a massive change with 2008 crash that happened, the the world economic crash that happened, the Wall Street uh, crash. I think At that time, people like Karan Johar and Yash Raj were trying to address an NRI audience,
mm,
uh, where they were also trying to show Indians Switzerland, but people in Switzerland, some part of rural India. That kind of thing was happening in the first part of 2000s. 2010 onwards, we see a kind of a different understanding. We don't see foreign that much, and we don't see India that much. We see a
mm.
studio where a lot of things are happening. It's a closed uh, environment, so we can't trace a trend today, as you rightly pointed out. But a trend that I have seen in the last few years, at least 10 years, which is uh,
Half
half my
mile.
age I have seen, half my age I have seen, and I don't like to sound older than my age, because then, uh, it becomes unnecessarily boring.
Mm,
Half my age I have seen, and that what makes my understanding what I think, and not taken from other scholars, that there is an emergence or re-emergence for people who are older than me of propaganda as cinema, state-sponsored cinema, which shows certain kind of depictions on screen. Certain communities are being focused, certain communities are being praised, certain gender is being targeted through cinema. Cinema as a soft power is taking over. And this is a trend that I see. I don't see a trend of how uh, things are, because now also there's another trend that these stories are uh, the stories are focused on these small cities, tier 2 cities.
mm,
So shooting in Lucknow are happening, shooting in Kanpur, Raebareli, or Morena, Shivpuri. These small towns, they are the focus of cinema today. So चाहे वो बरेली की बर्फी हो और तनु
mm.
वेड मनु हो, these kind of films are coming up today, and that's a good part of the story. But the sad part, or the worrying part is uh, films that might create divisions in society, because cinema has that power to really change public opinions, and that communist Russia did, USSR, communist Soviet did with their citizens, Hitler did with their citizens, America did with a lot of countries, not just America, but Vietnam, Iran, Iraq, all sorts of places. And India also must have done in the past, but we also see a trend today, which I think needs to be pointed out and understood with its complexities and its implication on society.
It's also marked by how mediocre it is because the Soviet filmmakers were some of the greatest filmmakers to exist. Sergei
Correct.
Einstein, Andrei Tarkovsky, the greats. Lev Kolesov, of course, started the montage effect. Revolutionized cinema. But here we are, and the cinema that we are seeing now is not just propaganda. It's bad propaganda. It's mediocre propaganda. So it's doubly bad. So leaving at that,
No, even today I see some good films. I just watched Vidhu Chopra's 12th Fail,
yeah,
which I think is a brilliant film. I
I
loved that
watched it
film, and I
yesterday.
watched it thrice. I watched it thrice till now. I watched it in the cinema hall, and since it came out on Hotstar, I watched it twice. Uh, I love Vidhu Chopra's
Hmm.
work. Uh, and then I also watched Donkey by this
Rajkumar
who
Hirani.
Hirani, yes, sorry. So I didn't like Donkey at all. I didn't like the film. A lot of people liked it, but I didn't enjoy the film. I think that's my personal opinion. But all sorts of films are coming up, and then comes along some file or some story as cinema, which is not good as a film. I'm not talking about the storyline or the propaganda, but even as a piece of art, it doesn't look good.
I think there's a division between OTT, what sort of movie gets into OTT and what sort of movies becomes blockbuster. There was a time when
Correct.
Tare Zameen Par was a blockbuster hit, but we can't imagine that happening today. So, on that decimal note, Isan, I had great fun chatting with you, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
Thank you
So,
so much, Anvesh. And I think you ask very difficult questions. Difficult to budge questions. So I really tried to save myself at points, but I really enjoyed this conversation. We really need to have such
mhm,
conversations and open conversations where we share some points, you share some point. We may not agree with all of them,
mm,
but we have a chat. And that conversation, the tradition of conversation is missing in our society today. And people are always so hyped up about taking a fight
mm,
that, and they are
proving that they're right.
violent. They are violent, which is dangerous for any society to prosper and grow. We have to be non-violent and have the patience and also the courage to have conversations.
This is the Indian tradition, the argumentative Indian, as Amartya said,
Vaad and Vivad,
Vaad and Vivad, and Purva Paksha, of course.
Purva
Uh,
Paksh and Paksh, yes.
so, thank you very much. And I'll put the links down below for anyone who wants to. I would recommend all of you go subscribe to his YouTube channel, Carbon, and follow him on Twitter. The links are down below. And do subscribe to my channel also. Have a great day.